Alright guys, today we've got another comparison in MX versus ATV. Today we've got the king of MX versus ATV games, Reflex, going up against MX versus ATV Legends. So, we have the throwback track DLC, we have all the tracks, we have all 7 tracks now. The final 3 tracks were the MX versus ATV Reflex tracks. We had Sugar Ridge, Sandwick, and Pine Top. Now, since we had been doing it for the first 2, I figured why not? I know it's not maybe everybody's favorite video, but it's kind of fun for me to, well, 1, to come back and play the original tracks, and then 2, to put them side by side and just see how well Rainbow Studios did with the remake. But to begin and start things off, we're going to finish up this lap around Sugar Ridge before we get the side by side for this very track. Now, coming back, it had been a while. It did play even better than I remembered in MX vs. ATV Reflex, but I don't want to really use the physics, you know, I prefer the physics in Reflex, yes. I don't want to use that against the tracks as far as comparison. So, as far as a comparison goes, I would say the environment, the setting, even the lighting and the dirt color are pretty similar. A bit lighter in MX vs. ATV Legends, but pretty similar. As far as the track layout, it is identical. You can basically hit the track the same way. I mean, this track, down to the braking acceleration bumps that are preset there, are pretty much the same. This was very, very well done. Now, the one thing I didn't prefer in Legends is how much drag was on the track. So, it needs to be there. It is a sandy track, but it feels like maybe they could tone it back just a bit. It's just my opinion. I'm sure some people disagree with that. That's fine. It should be sand. It should feel deep and pull on the bike and whatnot. But it feels, I don't know. I just wish the drag was a bit less in Legends. But overall, the tracks were great. Now, here we switch over to Sandwick. I do want to say that as far as a direct comparison goes, these 2 games matched up pretty perfect. You know, I was a bit surprised. I really thought MX vs. ATV Untamed would have been one of the faster games and matched up side by side best, but it actually is Reflex. I guess I didn't remember, you know, I play the game from time to time, but Reflex is a very, very, very fast and flowy game. And putting the 2 games side by side, they actually played pretty similar. You know, Legends is a very, very fast game, but so is Reflex. So they matched up pretty perfect. Some places, Legends would catch Reflex, but then other places of the track, Reflex would pull away from Legends, and they would come out just about perfect. Not quite, but pretty close. So I was a bit surprised by that, but these were the 2 best games and tracks to... 3 best tracks, 2 best games to put side by side for these remakes. And yeah, so Sandwick, coming back to it, I had played this track quite a bit. Sugar Ridge was one of my lesser played tracks out of the 3 we get in the throwback track DLC here, but Sandwick I had a bunch of time on. Now, one thing I didn't know or really pay attention to is Sugar Ridge does use the Sandwick backwards. So you always had like 2 versions of the same track. You had the longer version and then kind of the shorter version. And Sugar Ridge was just that, the shorter version of Sandwick. But it wasn't just the shorter version, it actually ran it backwards. So they did a great job on that. They did a great job on replicating that and bringing it to life in Legends. But here we switch over to the comparison. Reflex on the left, it'll stay that way, and Legends on the right. And same with Sugar Ridge, the track, the setting, the environment, even the dirt colors, and down to the braking bumps and acceleration bumps preset on the track. Rainbow Studios did a fantastic job at recreating Sandwick. But I feel kind of the same about this track as I did Sugar Ridge. It just has a bunch of drag on the bike, and it should. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I just want to make that clear because I always see comments that just like have selective hearing and don't hear everything I say sometimes, but it should feel like it pulls on the bike and there is drag on the bike. It just feels like sometimes there's more than I would be happy with, but I get why they did it. I'm fine with them doing it, and I realize they probably can't really change that because if they loosen up the drag and make it not so much, all of a sudden you'll be way over jumping things and it probably won't work with the way the track is scaled. So I get they got it there. It should be there. it's not my favorite thing, is how heavy it drags on the bike. But again, I realize it should be there. I realize there should be some drag there, but that's kind of why I guess I prefer Reflex, because in Reflex, it's still played pretty fast, and I just enjoy a good arcade, fast-paced track. So I prefer Sugar Ridge and Sandwick in MX vs. ATV Reflex, but Rainbow Studios did a nearly perfect job at recreating these first two tracks in MX vs. ATV Legends. So here we switch over to Pine Top, the king. Pine Top, this was a top 3 track for me. Out of every MX vs. ATV game, this was, I believe, my 3rd favorite track of all time. So I spent enough time on this track, I didn't really need to memorize it or refamiliarize myself with it coming back to Reflex. It was just like, tie in your shoe, man. Tie in your shoe, you don't forget. So the track is amazing. It plays amazing in this game with the way the physics are, and yes, I will say that I prefer the physics in Reflex. I am that guy that prefers Reflex as my favorite MX vs. ATV game of all time. It's not to say I don't like what's going on with the Legends, it's just a different game, but I still prefer the way Reflex plays. I just do. But I'm trying my best to not use that against the remakes, because mostly we're judging about the track. And I would say the drag, you know, me wanting a tiny bit less drag on the 2 sand tracks, it isn't, I mean, it is with the physics, but it isn't at the same time. I feel like I'm okay with having that small criticism against those 2 tracks. So, yeah, Pine Top, fantastic track in this game, and fantastic track in MX vs. ATV Legends. I would say Rainbow Studios did an equally good job with Pine Top. I would say these 2 tracks are virtually identical and equal in their own right. Even if I prefer the way Reflex plays, if I'm just gonna judge the track, or the 2 tracks, Rainbow Studios couldn't have done a better job. I mean, they did a nearly perfect job at recreating Pine Top in MX vs. ATV Legends, and the lap times are very, very similar. I know I'm not the best Reflex player, and I know I'm for sure not the best MX vs. ATV Legends player, but for me at least, this track played fast. The lines you could take, there was multiple lines you could take in Reflex, and you can take those exact same lines in MX vs. ATV Legends. So the lap times were very, very, very similar for me. Maybe not for you, maybe you're better or worse at one game or the other, but for me, the lap times were nearly identical and matched up almost perfect. Almost. Again, Legends could pull on Reflex in some places, but then, or gain, and then Reflex would pull Legends again. So, just a fantastic job. I really couldn't say enough good things about this specific track, or even the Throwback Track DLC as a whole. I feel like Rainbow Studios couldn't have done a better job. They did absolutely awesome on all the remakes, especially the Reflex ones and the MX vs. ATV Alive ones. I don't know, because I did see some of your guys' comments, but it does feel like the 2 Supercross tracks from Untamed and Unleashed were the least liked out of all of them. Capital City was cool, but I really feel like they could have done something different. Definitely Savannah was universally not wanted by the community. We wanted Fort Dodge 2, even Fort Dodge 1. I mean, there were so many Unleashed Supercross tracks that would have been great, but because of time constraints and resources and all that, you know, Rainbow Studios is a smaller studio. I know a lot of people say that's the reason why stuff is the way it is, but it is true. You don't have a huge studio here and all the time in the world, so, you know, they're doing the best they can with what they got, and they're doing a great job. These throwback tracks were great, and I personally want to see them run it back. I want to see them run it back, another throwback track DLC in Season 3. I don't know how long Rainbow Studios plans on supporting Legends as a live service game before they move on to whatever they're going to move on to, but I would enjoy seeing a second throwback track DLC. But you can only do it if you get Fort Dodge 2. You got to get Fort Dodge Round 2, maybe even Fort Dodge 1. Actually, I'd be cool if you put Fort Dodge 1 and 2, maybe a Kingston in there. MX vs. ATV Unleashed. There was a bunch of great tracks in that game, indoor and outdoor. But let me know in the comments what you guys think, which tracks you want to see. Would you like to see a second throwback track DLC, or are you okay with just this? And how do you feel about it? How do you feel they did with these specific throwback tracks, the MX vs. ATV Reflex ones, and I'd be curious to see. But you guys and girls are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for the support on the channel lately. It really does mean a lot. And until the next video, take it easy.